What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Brad and this is Reaction Nation, and tonight I'm going to take a little break from all the scary stuff. Kind of. Today we are doing a reaction to Watch Mojo's channel, another one of my favorite channels, but they had a little video called Horror Movies 1980s versus 1990s. Horror movies, that's my jam. I love horror movies. I've seen everything from the low budget to the classics like Dead of Night, The Bird, Psycho. I've seen so many horror movies, it's hard to keep track. It's a possibility I've seen every one of these movies, but we're gonna see, but as always, like, subscribe, comment, share, help this channel grow so it can be around for years and years and years to come. But without further ado, let's hit it.
We'll tear your soul apart.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and in this installment of Versus, we're comparing the 1980s and 1990s to see which reigned supreme as the better decade for horror movies.
Oh, I hate to even go here, but being a huge Michael Myers fan, considering it spanned so many decades, 78 to the 80s, to the 90s, to the 2000s, I really would like, I'm waiting to see how this is going to end up, but let's hit it. No rain. Excellent movie. Saw that.
It rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
Believe it or not, didn't really care for it, but it's whatever. To each his own.
We're gonna get you.
Saw that.
Not another piece.
You hang up on me again, I'll cut you.
Love Scream. Family just doesn't understand. Why do you like Scream like that? Everybody asks why you like Scream. I just love Scream. Besides Halloween, I really love Scream.
Like a fish, understand?
We're going to consider the horror trends for each decade, the best heroes, and of course, the best villains to help determine which decade was stronger overall. Which era of horror haunts your dreams the most? Let us know in the comments.
Sixth Sense fanatic.
Round 1. Villains. You can't have a good horror movie without a good antagonist. In some cases, the bad guys and girls are so compelling, we kind of hope they get away with it. This is especially true if the people they're chasing down are particularly insufferable, as is the case with many 80s slashers. But the 80s still provided us with some unforgettable villains.
Please, God. This is God.
For one, it marked the arrival of A Nightmare on Elm Street's Freddy Krueger, and the Friday the 13th series' Jason Voorhees, who would face off in the 2000s. While he was introduced in 1978's Halloween, Michael Myers still saw plenty of bloody action in the 80s. And let's not forget the start of the Hellraiser franchise and the introduction of Pinhead, or Jack Nicholson's unhinged performance.
Already, I haven't even seen... I'm in almost 2 minutes into this countdown, and already, I do not see how the 90s are going to win this. It's like the 80s were the creation of horror. But let's keep going.
Performance in The Shining.
I'm not gonna hurt you.
Stay away from me.
Wendy.
Stay away.
Darling.
Have to just put this out here, huge Stephen King fan. Own over 50 of his movies, and I'm being serious right now.
Light of my life. I'm not gonna hurt you. You didn't let me finish my sentence. I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Slasher doll Chucky was introduced in 1988's Child's Play, but we consider him more of a 90s symbol.
Just like the good old days. nothing like a strangulation to get the circulation going.
Guys, please, I know y'all see me smiling. Horror movie is my jam. It's my genre. I just can't help it. I love horror movies. So, I mean, it just is what it is. Don't call me a freak. This is just,
Other great 90s villains include Scream's Ghostface, Candyman, and of course, Hannibal Lecter.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Kathy Bates' frightening work as
oh man, the 90s kind of catching up. They kind of catching up. They had their moments.
Annie Wilkes in Misery is another great Oscar-winning horror performance from this decade.
You did it! You did it! You did it! You did it! You murdered my misery!
Annie!
Although the 90s has plenty of quality evil, we have to give this round to the 80s for how enduring these villains have been and how many films they've spawned. 80s 1, 90s 0.
I mean, I don't know how you guys would vote, but even though the 90s had Candyman, I love Candyman, I love Scream. Like I said, I'm a freak. What did Sheldon say? I'm not crazy. My mother had me tested. But anyway, I mean, was it any doubt that the 80s would win this? Let's just keep going.
1 down, 2 to go.
Round 2. Heroes.
I'm just going to go ahead and give my vote at the beginning, and I may be a little biased, but at the end of the day, I do not see how. Sidney Prescott is amazing, but I don't see how any horror hero can overcome Laurie Strode. She was made in the 80s. I mean, so let's get into it.
Underestimate the importance of a protagonist in a horror movie. Without someone to identify with and root for, a horror movie can be nothing more than an excuse for blood and guts. Two strong examples of horror heroes, or in this case heroines, are Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween 2, and Nancy Thompson, played by Heather Langenkamp in A Nightmare on Elm Street and Dream Warriors.
Right now, piggy.
On the male side of things, Bruce Campbell's performance as Ash in the Evil Dead films has rightfully made him a horror legend. The strong horror heroine trend continued in the 90s.
Freeze! Put your hands over your head and turn around. Spread your legs. Spread your legs. Put your hands in the back. Thumbs up. Freeze!
Jodie Foster won an Oscar for her role as FBI agent Clarice Starling in The Silence of the Lambs, and Neve Campbell's performance as Sidney Prescott helped to ground the Scream franchise.
Did I not mention her?
In your dreams.
We also rooted for Bruce Willis and Haley Joel Osment in The Sixth Sense, as well as the students lost in the woods in The Blair Witch Project.
That's another thing my family never understood. Like that movie always creeped me out. The Blair Witch Project, saw it when I was younger. It crept me out. Saw it again to see if it was creepy. Was older, still creeped me out. I don't know what it is about that movie, but maybe, when I watch movies, I tend to use my massive imagination, and I try to imagine myself in their predicaments, and just being lost in the woods at night, and even when day comes, you still can't find your way out. It's like a really bad fear of mine.
Ah! No. Oh, no.
You gotta be kidding me! This is a joke!
No.
This is another close call, but we have to go with the 90s for taking the seeds that the 80s planted and grown them even further. These performances aren't always the flashiest ones, and that's what makes them so strong. They give us something to latch onto as we enter these worlds of unknowable and unthinkable horrors. 80s one, 90s one.
Okay, disagree, just my opinion. I cannot get over the fact that Laurie Strode and Nancy, like, you can say they sowed the seeds. I mean, please, they are the trees. Or whatever.
How do you feel? Can you tell us what you saw? Can you tell us about what happened in there?
Sydney, can you tell us how it feels to be a hero?
Round 3. Scare factor.
What's that?
This is a tough one. The 90s might get this because the 80s, as technology grew, the jump scares kind of came later. So I may have to give this to the 90s simply because of technology and the way jump scares came along.
Being chased by a masked psychopath with a sharp object is certainly scary to imagine or experience. However, it can occasionally get a little tedious if not done right. 80s slashers like A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th weren't scary because they involved brutal death scenes. They were scary because they understood how to use suspense to build terror with an audience.
No, please, no! 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 Please,
Unfortunately, there are plenty of forgettable slashers that only cared about gore and not about thrills. The 90s took things in a more psychological direction, but that still provided plenty of frights.
You got what you deserved.
He's alive! He's alive!
Seven told the story of an unrelenting maniac from the perspective of two detectives trying to track him down. The Blair Witch Project focused on our fear of the unseen to terrifying effect.
Yeah, that movie right there.
And while Hannibal
that movie still kind of creeps me out. I don't know why.
Lecter might be best known for eating people, he is a former psychiatrist, and part of his scare factor comes from how well he can manipulate people, even when they think they're safe from him.
You wake up in the dark and hear the screaming of the lambs.
We always appreciate horror that makes us think more than they make us wince. The 90s wins this round for giving us multiple examples of great horror movies that skimp on the blood and deliver on the brains. 80s 1, 90s 2.
You fly back to school now, little Starling. Fly.
Round 4, originality.
Now, this is another situation where I'm going to give it to the 80s. I know I seem biased, but I really believe, for part of their own reasoning, how the 80s, were the seeds. Like, without the 80s, where would a lot of these 90s be with the sequels? People have to understand, Halloween started a lot of franchises, gave people ideas about a lot of movies. So I kind of feel like everything has been done after the 80s in some kind of way. All the 80s horror movies have been copied. They were original, and everyone else tries to watch them, maybe find ideas or grasp a concept from them. So 80s to me,
A new take on horror is all too rare, with too many studios just trying to cash in on whatever's hot. The best horror films of the 80s were the ones that brought us new takes on the genre and kicked off some very enduring franchises.
Nancy, help me, please. Save me from
Freddy.
Can you imagine horror today without the influence of A Nightmare on Elm Street,
Exactly.
Friday the 13th and
Halloween.
The Evil Dead, as well as their associated characters?
You will die! Like the others before you. One by one we will take you.
But we also appreciate how the 90s took horror in a new direction.
Can y'all I was giddy about this. I love horror movies. I just don't understand it doesn't have to be your favorite, but I really don't understand those who don't like horror movies.
So, Mr. Originality, how would you make it different?
I'd let the geek get the girl.
One of the best examples of the old influencing the new is in the Scream series. Here, Elm Street director Wes Craven deconstructed some of the tropes he helped to popularize.
Never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back.
The Blair Witch Project showed us just how scary found footage horror could be, and The Sixth Sense delivered a meditation on grief and letting go, disguised as a ghost story.
I think I can go now. Just needed to do a couple things.
The 80s wins this round because of how many amazing series started this decade. There have been reboots of so many 80s franchises because studios recognise how valuable these properties are and how enduring the characters are. This decade truly feels like a game-changing one when it comes to the ingenuity in horror movies. 80s too, 90s too.
Oh, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications.
Round 5. Overall quality.
Quality. This isn't easy for me. Again, this goes back to originality. Like the quality, yes, the 80s had some really lame movies, but they also had a lot of, I just can't, je ne sais quoi, it's just, I'm at a loss. I may have to give, this may be a tie for me, anyway.
This is probably the hardest round of them all. Both the 80s and 90s have contributed some of the finest horror films of all time.
I know horror, y'all. See, I'm telling you.
What?
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
For the 80s, we have outstanding chillers like A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Thing, The Shining, and The Evil Dead. If you don't like any of these movies, you simply don't like horror. If you've seen those and are looking for some more great 80s horror, we recommend Poltergeist, The Fly, and Reanimator.
You killed him! No, I did not. I gave him life.
But horror in the 90s was anything but a step down. The Silence of the Lambs' Best Picture win showed that horror deserved to be treated just as seriously as any other genre.
You're very frank, Clarice. I think it would be quite something to know you in private life.
Meanwhile, Scream was a sharp satire that still worked as a traditional slasher, and the Blair Witch Project showed how much tension could be created with a camcorder.
I'm scared to close my eyes. I'm scared to open them.
Other 90s horror films we love include Kronos, Brain Dead, and Candyman.
Be my victim.
You can't go wrong with either decade, But when it comes to overall movie quality, we have to give it to the 90s. In addition to the ones that we've already mentioned, we still get shivers watching J-horror classics like Ringu, Oscar winners like Misery, and even remakes that arguably live up to the original, like Night of the Living Dead. And we're sure they'll hold up for decades to come. 80s 2, 90s 3. It was a close race, but the 90s ekes out on victory for horror movie supremacy.
Don't with the Chuck.
Yep.
Do you agree with?
Okay, y'all. To be honest, I came into this believing that 80s just would easily win this, but it was closer than I thought. I actually would have made it a tie. I would have given both the decades a point for that last one. No, actually the 80s would have won for me because one of the rounds I disagreed. I would have given it to the 80s. But guys, again, I will be back with another reaction video. I plan on doing more reviews soon. For those of you who are looking for reviews, I apologize. I will come back with reviews, I promise. But like, subscribe, comment, share. Please subscribe, guys. But until next time, I'll see you all later.